is Jennifer Zenz-Olson, licensed independent clinical social worker, and this is my dear friend, Dr. Natalie Marr. We are Women of Wellness, and we are here to do our series. It's called Teen Suicide, A Call to Connection. Today, our panel is going to be full of 4 teens. We have Erin, Gabby, Reese, and Nicole, who will be sharing their own experiences and stories around teen suicide. And so what I think we took away the most as we head into this series was the fact that we could really utilize their information to talk about myths around suicide. So we're going to be doing that throughout. This panel in particular is just kind of helping dispel myths as we go through our series.
Yes.
So here they are sharing their personal stories around suicide.
A senior at my high school committed suicide a couple months ago. I've had friends who have struggled, and although she wasn't a teenager, my dad's ex-wife killed herself. It was before I was born, but it's still something I think about sometimes.
Oh, sure. Okay.
And that's pretty much it for me. I haven't had anyone that I've known personally commit suicide, but
Okay.
I've had friends who have struggled with thoughts like that.
I actually don't have any personal experiences with it. I've never had any suicidal thoughts. I've no depression. I've never had anything of the sort. I call myself lucky in that regard because I know a lot of people that do, and it's awful. It's terrible.
Yeah.
So I am really grateful for my luck and not in that department of not having a disorder of that type. Just very happy with that. So I don't have any personal experiences, but I know people that have. So he was in my choir. So I knew him and I saw him the day before.
Okay.
And so that was really, really hard when I heard about it. And I was like, wow, I knew this kid and I saw him walking around and just I'll never see him again.
Yeah.
I never talked to him terribly well, but I knew of him.
Okay.
And it was just really strange to me to consider that he is no longer with us. And it was really, really eye-opening.
Yeah.
I had an experience with suicide that close to me because I've heard of it,
Right.
but I never knew the people. This is the first time I've kind of known someone.
And what was it, from your perspective, what was it like to watch the other people in school that maybe did have a deeper connection? Like you knew him and it was that shock of like, I just saw you and now you're not here. What was it like for you to see other people that were maybe even closer to him in, just a little bit more intimate relationship or whatever? What was that like to see that?
It was awful. Multiple teachers I knew just had us do nothing that day. It was a day of relaxing, honestly, because they wanted us to unwind and have time. Specifically, I remember my choir teacher, who was the teacher of that class that I knew him in. She was hit hardest in that entire class. They're type of people that are very close with one another.
Okay.
And so they knew him, and even the ones that I knew didn't know him very well were still crying. And it was really sad, and I didn't personally cry. I was very upset inside. I just was not crying. But all the people that were, I felt really bad for them as well, because it affected everyone. There are obviously way more things behind the scene.
Right.
You never know exactly, but
Right.
people were upset about that, and that was I think that's one of the big things I noticed is they were angry as well.
Yeah.
Which is obviously a part of that because you're angry that this happened, and it was so frustrating. You have 2 emotions you feel: it's sadness and anger. And so that's just the biggest thing I noticed.
Yeah.
Is mostly kids being either entirely upset and just crying,
Okay.
and then some people that are just angry, and of course some people that were both.
So we stopped the video here in the middle of their personal stories just to make mention that their outward affect or how they're feeling, how that looks on the outside of them, doesn't always match their internal affect. And that's true of our 4 panelists, but they also do a wonderful job throughout the series actually talking to that particular fact.
Exactly.
That's an experience that they have that they don't always know how their peers are feeling internally, because on the outside it looks a lot different. So we wanted just to stop and make mention of that.
Right. Bring attention to the fact that we don't, again, want to just assume that someone's going to look sad or look distraught if they're actually going through something emotional. In fact, as we proceed, you're going to hear stories to the contrary of people who looked like they were really doing well and in fact were really struggling and suffering.
Yeah. So now we'll hear from Nicole and Gabby.
I remember when first committed suicide.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure, because I remember she was a senior. She was supposed to be a senior at Blaine this year. She committed suicide in right before summer started.
Yep.
And she was good friends with my sister, and they were in BPA together. And I remember my sister going to her funeral and coming back home and talking about it, and just how sad it was, and how like there was a bunch of pictures up
Mm-hmm.
of her and things like that, and how everyone there was crying.
Mm-hmm.
And then after he passed away, I've known him since probably 6th grade, and we were never like super close friends, and we only ever talked like maybe a few times if we had classes together, but it was like still a person I've grown up with and like seen them since like I was younger, and like where they've gone in life.
Right.
And it was hard seeing like all the people that were friends with him and like loved him that like were impacted at school and things like that.
Yes.
And then after he passed away, it took me a while to like put the connection together that I had with him. But we used to sit by each other in 3rd grade,
Okay.
and he'd always let me borrow his books and things like that. And he moved away, and then he came back, I think. I'm not sure, but he was dating a girl on my team, and it sucked to like have to see her go through all that. And she ended up not being on the team anymore and like taking time for herself, which I think is really good.
Yeah.
And then after he passed away, I was good friends with him in elementary school too. We kind of fell off after that, but like with knowing these people but not knowing them like super well, it's hard
Yeah.
because it feels like if you were just stuck in their life and you're around them and like you're friends with them, maybe you could have been there to help and things like that. And then for, I think, I can't remember her name, but the girl who committed suicide at Spring Lake Park, a lot of my friends played soccer and were friends with her and knew her.
Mm-hmm.
And it sucked because I'm pretty sure she was dating someone who committed suicide, and then she was having a rough time and people weren't being the most pleasant about it. After a lot of it happened,
Yeah.
we'd have just days where we wouldn't do anything really in school, and the teachers would just take time to grieve. And a lot of them would talk like the whole hour about it and like how they've personally been affected
Yeah.
and things like that. And I remember that you could go down to the auditorium if you like ever needed to leave a class and like take a break throughout the day, and they were like completely lenient about it. And I feel like everyone at school really took it personally, even if they didn't know them personally.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really doom and gloom for a while.
Yeah.
And it was like hard to recover from that. And I feel like the school did a good job. Like there were like legal things like that you can't talk about, and like some people like it's iffy around there, but I feel like they did as much as they could with what they got.
Okay.
And so I'm glad that they took those steps.
So you feel like you did see some things at school that they were attempting to spend time around. You saw some teachers be vulnerable and talk about their stories, and definitely it sounds like everybody was kind of taking time to honor.
Yeah.
I feel like when everybody's in raw grief, I mean, so I know it can feel like, oh, we're taking a pause, but I also feel like that's a beautiful way to honor the loss for everybody, is to kind of slow everything down and not just be like plowing straight ahead. You know what I mean? Like we need to have somebody recognize that there's something that's really awful going on. Somebody needs to recognize the suffering. So I'm grateful for any teachers that were willing to kind of like push pause or ask with how you guys were doing or let you guys leave the room or whatever attempt they were making. I'm grateful for it. So.
And what Reese said about a lot of people being angry and upset about it, I definitely see where they were coming from, because it seemed at first like the school was almost like not doing enough.
Yeah.
But once you like get out of the first few days of it or weeks or months, and you like start to understand the legal issues and like other things and like the reasons why they have to be so careful about it, it's like it's a little more peace.
I haven't had any personal experience with anyone who has committed suicide, thankfully.
Yeah.
But I definitely have heard of all the suicides in the district, and it's heartbreaking. It's really sad, and no one should ever go through that.
No.
So I don't have much to say about personal experience with anyone, but yeah, I've definitely.
So that was really nice to hear from all of them, what their personal experiences have been. One thing I want to point out is almost all of them start by saying, I don't have a personal experience, and then go on to tell you how they've been touched by suicide.
Right.
And this is a myth that I would like to dispel right off the bat. This idea that if it's not an internal experience that I've had, then it isn't part of my personal experience as a human in this world. It absolutely is. And what you'll see as we do our series of videos is that we talk to a bunch of adults whose personal experience was not something that necessarily they experienced themselves, but something that touched them in their lifetime from someone else. That is the personal experience. And so it's interesting. I mean, they're teens, and so we expected to see some of these concrete ways of approaching the world showing up in how they think about things.
But it's also something that I hope that we're able to dispel down the road is encouraging them to understand that those are their stories, and they are they're being affected, whether or not they kind of, you know, it's an exact friend, a direct friend, or a direct family member, that when these things happen within our community, it has its way of making its way through so many of us, right? That energetic leap, if you will, of like, we're all being affected in some way. It's so sad, but a great myth to kind of bring forward and pay attention to as we go, because as they talked, it's abundantly clear
It is.
they've all had numerous interactions in some way, shape, or form with suicide.
Yes.
So next up, we're going to be talking about what they learned and was it helpful? Do you see quite a bit of that around you? Do you feel like you are witnessing quite a bit of that kind of struggle?
Honestly, no. Actually, it's well, especially not now. It's my family.
Different.
Even back in Blaine, it was still fairly apparent to me. I mean, there were obviously some, but I don't think most people honestly do.
Okay.
But I think it's easy for the 5% that do to be a big factor. But when honestly there aren't that many, but still, even one's a lot.
Yeah.
So like 2 maybe. You know, that clearly were like suffering and should have helped, but they weren't.
That you knew, that you could see.
Yeah.
Okay.
I've heard from it because when I think right when there started becoming, I think there was a suicide actually at the middle school, like where I went, Oakview Middle School. Was that? I think, yeah, I heard about that. I know at that point, the school like sent out something that was like, you should, if you are having any issues, you should definitely reach out. We have counselors, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I know that it is happening and it is not something to joke about.
Right.
And sometimes there are people that do joke about that, and it's not necessary at all in any way, shape, or form. And also another thing is you never know what someone is going through, whether it's with friends or at home or whatever it is, because there might be people that seem fine one day, but then the next day they're not at school or something's going on.
For me, I think the takeaway that's very interesting from listening to Reese and Gabby talk, where Reese opens this segment and talks about that there aren't very many people that are suffering. And I ask him, I sort of lead in like, so do you see some of this at school? Because I always am curious about their personal experiences and what they're aware of and what they're seeing. And for me, the concern is that, you know, mental health in high school is rampant. And what worries me is that our kids are not aware. They're not aware of how much it's going on. And when you hear Reese talk about this very small number of people that he thinks might actually be suffering, and the number is actually exponentially large, and which means that teens are the best, you know, excuse the language, bullshit artists on the planet. I mean, they are the kings and queens of, you know, kind of saving face, if you will.
And that's what Gabby said.
And that's exactly,
Gabby just, you know, she says it very beautifully. So one day they show up this way, and the next day you hear that they weren't doing so well.
Right.
So how they look on the outside, how these teens are showing up in their lives, really belies what's going on underneath.
Absolutely.
And I think that one other aspect to that is if your experience, these teens project their own experience out onto the world. So if your experience is life is pretty good, that is how you'll think.
Right.
Which is great. It's a beautiful thing.
Absolutely.
And if you're feeling really internally icky, you project onto the world that you think most people are feeling that way.
Right.
And that's another aspect that you're seeing played out here.
Yeah, exactly. We wanted to pause and kind of reflect on that because I think that's just a huge aspect of what teens are facing, and we want to be really aware that we can't look and see something that's going to be evident. We want our kids to know they're not going to look and see something evident, because then we go, oh, I don't have to worry about them, check, because they look great, right? Yes. They're out doing their sports and doing the grades and doing the, I think it's really that we want to be self-aware that it's not going to look like a thing. And so I just love where he kind of, he and Gabby kind of in a nutshell for us make us very aware it's not going to look like a certain thing, but also that there's a large number of kids that actually are truly suffering and won't look anything like that. So we just want to be aware of that.
Sure.
Yeah. So next up, we're going to have Erin and Reese sharing a little bit more. And then I think Nicole closes for us on education.
I don't remember the first suicide I ever heard about.
Okay.
But I heard about the ones over at Blaine this year, and then there was the one at my school, and there's actually one at the middle school, Coon Rapids Middle School, in the same weekend.
Oh.
So, that's really it, because I don't remember how I first learned about suicide in the first place. I mean, obviously they talk about it in health class because there's a mental health unit, so
Sure.
but they don't go super in depth.
Okay.
And my school does have this thing they call Change for Chill Week, where it's all focused on mental health, but every year I've been going to that school, which is 3 years now, they've mentioned it at the beginning of the week that it starts, and then they don't mention it again.
Okay.
So there's not any like, activities that are centered around it when maybe there should be.
I think the first one I ever heard about was Robin Williams.
Oh, yes.
That was sad for me. A different kind of sad though for compared to the kids at school.
Sure.
It was just, if I felt like it had lost a great person, and it's really a shame that he was unaware of how much we all loved him.
Yeah.
And that's obviously how it goes for all suicides. Is it's just such a place of hurt that it's not even rational. It's not rational anymore. And it was just a really sad day when I heard that, and I was like, I didn't even know him, but it still sucks.
Yeah.
That was my first experience with it.
Okay.
And just I didn't really comprehend why you would do that to yourself. It just didn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
I see it. I understand it now.
Yeah.
And just such a great loss.
Yeah.
I love his movies, and he was such a nice guy.
Yeah.
It's really a shame.
Yeah, it is. Somebody that always looked like they had a good sense of humor, right?
Yeah, it was like he was a fun guy.
Yeah.
He was happy, but on the inside, he was not happy. And I watched a couple he's been on a couple talk shows, and I know I watched one where they were like kind of honoring his memory.
Yeah.
I don't remember who it was, but he was like, we say farewell to the man who we all loved, who we didn't know had such great pain.
Yeah.
Because he didn't tell anyone, and that was the thing. No one knew.
Right.
You would think that some people would have an inkling of it. No, he just kept it completely hidden.
Yeah.
And then just boom.
Yeah.
One day on the news, Robin Williams gone. It was insane. No one saw it coming.
I feel like ever since we were little kids, we were always told that if you need to talk to someone, talk to an adult, and then they can get you help and things like that.
Yeah.
And then I remember we learned about it in health. There's like a mental health unit, and we talk about like different disorders and like mental health issues, and that's about it. And then after, I know there's things that like go around in the school, like clubs and activities and things like that. And for student council personally, like we try to do things.
Yeah.
Like we have a mental health month where we try to like reach out to people and do things.
Okay.
But I feel like we don't get educated enough about it.
So these guys do a nice job here of really showing you that it's limited. There is, the formal education is still, it leaves much to be desired. We'll hear more on that from adults' perspectives as we go through this series.
Yeah.
One aspect that was intriguing to me is Reese talking about his experience learning about suicide through the media, through Robin Williams in particular.
Yes.
I think it's important to point out that media is a major teacher for our kids, whether for good or for not good.
Yeah.
It isn't just families and schools that are educating our kids. They get a lot of what they know about the world through media, through all varieties of that. And so I just wanted to kind of touch on that because it is an interesting concept, and they are so much more impressionable than we are by the time we get into our adulthood.
Right.
And yet they're at the very beginning stages. So the scaffolding for what they think about the world, you know, how they've created definitions and constructs for the world comes mostly during these years of their life.
Right.
So they're going to build upon that. And if the very foundation of what they're building their ideas upon has myth interlaid into it, like systemically over time, they have a flawed way of reasoning with the world.
We're already stuck.
We're already,
We're already stuck. We've already laid the groundwork for living in a space of kind of non-reality, unfortunately, right? So his laying that out for us was really crucial. And a thing I think that really struck me was this idea that we're going to keep hearing over and over again about how loved people are, and how and so even Reese beautifully outlines, you know, he was so loved, and how can someone who's so funny and so loved and things like that, how could somebody, you know, make those decisions? And you'll hear kids say too, we need to make sure people know that they're loved. I think that one of our myths here is that being loved is going to be the reason that someone won't commit suicide. And I think we've drawn this really sort of black and white, you know, way of thinking about that. And truth be told is I think that most every single person is deeply loved, right? That isn't, and if only that was the reason someone wouldn't, right? And so I understand our desire to reach out and say, and we should always be validating and telling one another how, you know, loved each of us is. I think that's so crucial. But I get worried that we believe that that's the key factor for somebody not committing suicide.
And indeed, people know they're loved and still commit suicide.
Exactly.
Unfortunately.
Exactly.
Not all are like that, but not all cases of any of this are the same.
Sure.
We've said that, and we'll continue to say that over and over through the series.
And we know that people feel worthless and unlovable. We know, obviously, as clinicians, I mean, Natalie and I have heard it in our offices probably no less than 1 million times. I want to be really clear that at the end of someone's resources, like Natalie refers to it, that's not where their thinking is. It isn't, you know, that's not the final piece is, am I loved or not? And so I just want us to kind of break out of that mold as well. Yes, we want to make sure that people know that, but that's not really the black and white resolution of why someone's going to choose to commit suicide or not.
It's not a magic pill.
It is not a magic pill. And so because then I think when people are left behind, there's this, did I say enough? Did I love enough? Did I do enough? Right? So it leads to this horrible aftermath. And I think that that's a terrible place to leave people, because then we feel really responsible for someone else's actions. And so again, just keeping that in mind, that maybe it's not quite so black and white, and can we think about it just a little bit differently? Would it be more helpful to all of us? Yeah. And so next up, we're going to be talking about some more disconnects that our kids were able to outline for us in terms of teen suicide.
Obviously, I want to help them, but the one who struggles the most, she'll reach out and say that she wants help. And then when that help is offered to her, she doesn't take it. So that gets to be really frustrating because, you know, she'll say that she wants help, and then the counselors at school will call her down, and she gets all upset saying, like, why are they trying to be in my life? And I just want to tell her, you can't say you want help if you're not willing to accept it. Every time I've told one of my friends, like, they've expressed to me that they're struggling, it's like, I'm not trained, like, I'll help you as best as I can, but ultimately I can't, like, I'm not a professional. So I've told them, like, oh, reach out to your counselor at school, and they go, no, I'm not going to the counselor. It's like, then what, like, I can't do the extensive, like, not treatment, but help and advice that you need for this issue. Like, I can only do so much. I have a direct experience with one of my friends and her parents being the disconnect to her using resources. She was involved with the incident that happened with the young man our freshman year.
Yes.
And she expressed to her parents that she was not okay. She was really struggling with it, and they said, you're fine. When she outright told them, I'm not
Yeah.
doing well with this. I'm really struggling.
So
And she still has yet to seek help for it. And it's been almost 3 years. There's one of my friends, she texted me, and she was, because I told her she was really struggling, and she has gone to therapy. So I told her, like, you need to talk to your mom about getting back into therapy because you're really struggling with your
right.
issues.
Yes.
I didn't know specifically what they were, but she had expressed to me multiple times that she was struggling. And she said, they're just going to tell my parents. And so I told her, like as long as whatever you're talking about is in the past and you're not currently suicidal or hurting yourself, they should not be telling your parents unless you want them to. If only if it's current and you're in danger, they have to tell your parents. And she said, and so she was all like, so if it's in the past, they won't tell them. And I said, they should not be telling them if it's in the past, only if you want them to. A lot of people have mentioned like school being like a huge reason for all the mental health issues, which it is for a lot of kids. But with me personally, I don't like, school just comes really easily to me. So that's not the things that I get
Sure.
like upset about or anxious about.
Yeah.
So there are kids who like it's stuff completely outside of school, and maybe schools could address that too, because it does seem that their main focus is around like if you're struggling in any classes or with any students in your classes or any teachers, like you can come down and talk about it. But there are a lot of kids who school isn't the issue at all.
I think in society it is shown that it's not okay to not be okay, which
Oh, girl.
I completely disagree with. It is okay to not be okay. Everyone's not okay at some point in their life. Like, that's just life.
Yep.
And I think just validating people's feelings and making sure that they are heard, they are cared about and loved,
Absolutely.
and just having an outlet to know that what they're feeling is okay and it's not normal.
Yeah.
It's unique in their own way, but there's many people that are going through something like that.
Speaking on that personally, for me, it feels like I'm constantly surrounded by people, and I have like loving friends and loving family and like great people around me all the time. But at a certain point, it's just like being by yourself, and like I don't know what it is, but it's just self-isolation to the point where I feel like no one else around me could like understand or help or things like that. So it's just, I feel like there's a disconnect because I understand that there's people that are willing to help and there's like good people and like there's like good things that can come from it, but it's like, I don't know how to, it's like you're just by yourself even though everyone else is around you.
I can know with my mind, and this is how I always say it, I can know with my mind how loved I am. I got friends, I'm involved in this thing, I'm on this team, I've got all these things right here, but sometimes it's like it doesn't connect to your heart. And so I think that sense of being surrounded by people and even knowing you're loved, you can still feel very alone. If I'm understanding you correctly, is that kind of what you're saying? Yeah, I think that's not uncommon, actually.
Yeah.
I'd love to know about why that is. Do you have thoughts about why that is? I don't have an answer, I'm asking you.
I'm not 100% sure. I've thought on it before quite a bit, but I'm personally just a really independent person, and I don't get vulnerable with people that much, and I don't really share a lot with people, and I like to keep to myself and not really open up. That's just me. So it's hard for me to like go around and trust people. I feel like even yourself, like just admitting that you need help or that you could use help or that talking to someone would go a long way.
So there's a lot of material in that sequence and some really good, insights from our teens.
Yes.
I am happy that one of them, Erin, brought up the idea that parents don't always heed what their teens are telling them. That communication breakdown is probably one of the largest disconnects I know that I've heard in my office. I'm sure that you have as well.
Yes.
And I am glad that one of the teens, pointed out that this could be one of the issues, is not that help isn't being asked for, but that help isn't coming because people aren't hearing the gravity of the experience from the teen.
Right. And how often do you hear about drama? Kids being dramatic.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, if any teens are watching this, raise your hand. If you've ever been told you're being dramatic about something, right? So it's one of those scenarios that I think is, really concerning, is this concept that kids are always just being melodramatic and they don't actually have something really true going on.
Which is a myth.
It is a huge myth. Absolutely. Right.
And it's also good for us to remember that their brain is on fire at this point, just growing exponentially during those teen years. And hormones are real.
Yeah.
They're real for the boys and for the girls. It isn't just something that girls go through. There's all sorts of chemistry happening inside of them that also leads to their experience is bigger,
it feels
around
bigger.
Smaller things, but it's real for them, and that we need to take that seriously and not just see it through our adult lens.
Exactly.
It's also interesting that Erin points out that school isn't an issue for her, because one of the assumptions, I think, is that school becomes a huge stress.
Right.
It could be a refuge for many, many of our teens.
Sure, absolutely.
And
it is.
I want us to keep that in mind. It's one of the reasons why we, want to make suggestions about how things could go differently in the school setting, and how we could better meet our kids where their needs are, and have that marry up to curriculum, have that marry up to policy, and not let policy be something that impedes our ability to be creative in that respect.
And then Gabby comes in, and Gabby just is like, one of the money statements for me is, it's not okay to not be okay. And that is absolutely a cultural phenomenon going on right now. This huge point that it's not okay. We have all this positive vibes only, and I've kind of talked about, toxic positivity. And I think that that's getting at it, that we've almost created an environment where it's like, don't put your sad stuff, don't put your anxious stuff out there. We don't want to hear it. There's no place for your feelings here. And so I love that she says that, because that's an absolute cultural experience that our kids are having.
For sure.
Right. We want you to be armed with information and language to talk about it, but don't talk about it. Right. I mean, look at the dichotomy. Don't be that way. Look at the dichotomy for our kids. Don't be that way. Don't bring your stuff here. That is not the message that we want our kids to hear.
No.
And so I love that she encapsulates that for me. And then Nicole follows up. She talks about her difficulty of feeling in the midst of all these people that she's got that love her, right? We just got done talking about this concept of love. She's like, I know I've got all these people and resources, and sometimes still I don't feel like I can trust and be vulnerable.
Right.
That's really where she's going, is this difficulty of like, I think she's a very high functioning, lots going on, very, very just successful young woman.
Right.
And I think her experience is that then it's like maybe making it hard for her to reach out, even though she knows she's got all these people that love her and great resources where she could go if she needed. And yet that struggle with vulnerability, kind of staying isolated away from it, is one of our biggest concerns for our kids. It's a huge disconnect. It's just huge. And so I hope that one of the things we do is come in and we're able to address that for our kids.
Yes,
creating a different,
to be able to do that.
Yeah,
and create a culture in which, when a peer wants to help a peer, Erin talks about how she has a friend that has a lot of issues, but then doesn't take help. Creating a culture where that doesn't happen, creating a culture where parents believe what they're hearing and take it very seriously, and even on the error on the side of caution, might over interact or over help rather than under help when our kids' mental health is at risk.
Absolutely. Yeah. So beautiful points made by them, so articulate, and again, just very helpful in outlining, I think, their experiences and some of the areas that all of us can work on together. And next up, they're going to share some of their ideas on the barriers that they face.
But I think one thing that I think most teenagers, especially in high school, can agree with this, that there's a lot of pressure put on students in high school, because there's grades, there's relationships, there's friends, there's teachers, family, sports, activities, everything is like on top of you. And sometimes that affects mental health a little bit.
A
Well,
lot.
not a lot of it.
A lot,
Ding, ding, a
a
lot.
lot of it.
So yeah, that's my take on it.
Yeah.
So that probably doesn't help if you already have depression and anxiety, any type of disorder.
Right.
So I don't know. Sometimes I feel like teachers don't understand, and it's hard to like communicate that
Sure.
if you don't want to talk about it. And also, if you don't have, I'm fortunate enough to have a great support system with friends, family, all that, but some people don't, so that also can affect it. They're not perfect, which is what everyone strives to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, you want to be perfect.
Everyone puts on a fake smile. They make it seem like it's easy and that everything's okay, when most of the time it might not be. And then other people are like, I want to do that. I'm going to be able to do all this. How come I am doing all this stuff, but I'm breaking down inside?
People won't accept that they have an issue or that something's wrong, and they won't want to be able to fix it. And even if help is offered, they won't take it because they don't want to like have an actual problem.
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of people who have struggled with it, and it almost feels like there's not a lot that you can do, because if you go and talk to someone and you get them the help that they need, and then they don't talk to the person that helps them, and then they'll end up resenting you. Or they could like reach out to someone and like they don't tell them the full truth, or they don't get the help they need because like they don't trust them.
Mhm.
I feel like it would be amazing if there was like one perfect way to go about it, but it's not, and there's so many issues.
Mhm.
And I feel like that's why a lot of people fall through the cracks, is because there's no book for like every single person
Nope.
explaining like here's what to do. And when we're talking about like the stress of like school and being a teenager and sports and work and job and clubs and all that, we're kids. We're 15, 16, 17, 18. We don't know how to handle this stuff well.
Mhm.
Like we could have been taught as best as we could, but for each individual person to handle it differently. And some people don't handle it well.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's where a lot of big issues come in.
Yeah.
And then they start to isolate themselves and feel alone.
So one of the biggest barriers here is that teens feel an enormous amount of pressure, pressure to be perfect.
Yeah.
And I love that they speak to this. And so we really just wanted to kind of hone in on this particular subject. This is the huge myth, is that our kids are believing, it's a myth for them, that they need to be infallible.
Exactly.
Which probably implies that they think that we're infallible, or that the ultimate goal in life is to be infallible. That is a big fat myth, right? Like we need to be better as a society, you know, in our communities, in our schools, and in our homes, being fallible with one another and saying it isn't about being perfect. It's about getting back up. It's about apologizing. It's about resiliency.
Exactly.
It is never about you're not going to come up against adversity internally or externally.
Right.
That's a big myth.
It's about accountability. And I think that one of the things that we can all do is show up in our humanity, is show up when we make mistakes. You know, I've as a parent had to go to my daughter and say, that interaction we had right there, I blew it. I mean, I'll just, you know, and we'll have an exchange around it, and she'll go, it's okay, Mom. And I go, but it's not okay. You know, I'm the first one to stop her and say, I make mistakes. I want you to see I make mistakes. I think that that's the language that we want to be using for our kids, is we're going to be, we're going to be unsuccessful sometimes in the things that we do, and making space for that and not making it the worst thing in the world, because it's not. It's just being a human being, right?
It's just being a human being. My therapist, yes, because therapists go to therapists. My therapist always says it's perfect, be perfectly imperfect.
I love that.
That the perfection is really about being imperfect and
trying.
owning it and learning how to be human in this world.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then it's really lovely at the very kind of end of this clip. I have to say, Nicole says this thing that for us just was the money.
Yeah.
When she said, and you'll capture her saying, she goes, we're 15, 16, 17, 18. We don't know what we're doing. And we were like, oh, bless you, sweetheart.
Mouths of babes.
But exactly, but I love what she's saying, and she's not saying it to be derogatory towards teens. What she's saying is, we don't know what to do with all of this pressure.
Right.
We don't necessarily have the tools to cope with all the things that are coming at us, and they don't. She says it point blank. It's so beautifully articulated right there. And our job is to sit with them and help them navigate those things, because they don't feel ready. They don't feel prepared. And for some of these things, it is hard to face. It's hard to deal with. And I know one of our parents down the road is going to talk about this, that, you know, they're going to come up against things that they aren't prepared for. Right. And as community, family, whomever, our job is to kind of step in and keep holding that scaffolding. I love that language, right? Like, we hold scaffolding for them to figure that out within it, with some safety and kind of boundaries around that. So it was just beautiful.
It's beautiful that Nicole is the one saying that, because remember, she's also the one telling us that she's fiercely independent and doesn't want to reach out for help, and doesn't see how she would create that vulnerability for herself. So here's the double bind that the kids are
living in,
and we need to make space in our communities and our families and in our schools to fix that for them.
Right. So next up, we're going to be talking about stigma.
One of the same friend who like doesn't accept the help that's offered to her, this actually goes right into that. She expressed to our orchestra teacher, like, she had a friend who passed away. I didn't know them. It was just someone she knew. She didn't go to our school, but she was very sad that day at school, obviously. And she expressed that to my orchestra teacher, and obviously he just reached out to her counselor, saying just call her up and check in with her. And then she started texting me saying, like, I got to pass to the counselors. And I told her, I said, oh, the orchestra teacher probably wants them to check in with you. And so she went up there, and then she texted me after saying she was all upset, saying, like, why do they want to try and be in my life and everything? Just like, it's just frustrating that she does that every single time. She'll express that she wants or needs help, and then gets mad when it's offered to her. There's still a really huge stigma around therapy. And I think that might be like a huge reason of why kids won't reach out. Or
they're afraid of going to therapy.
Yeah, pretty much, because, you know, it's for crazy people. And I mean, definitely like trying to break that stigma, but then there's like, how can you get through to most likely stubborn teenagers that it's not for crazy people, or like
people are afraid to talk about their problems. So when someone confronts them, like, do you have anything you'd like to talk about, they're like, no.
They turn
oh, bye, no thanks, you know, they just don't want to talk about it. So it's really hard for people to go to them. This question of how can we go to them is almost impossible. You need to have a specific kind of mindset. The kid needs to have a specific kind of mindset that would allow them to accept help. Because some kids, pride, fear, all these things. You know, I know a couple people that like don't want help because to them it's like they're weak. Even though they're suffering, they're like, I'm not weak. I can do it by myself, and they can't. And then at the same time, it's hard for them to ask for help because, again, only weaklings ask for help. Obviously, isn't true. But to them, it's just taken like that. So that's really hard. You'd be one of those people that is wrong in the head.
So with this conversation, I love that Erin opens and talks about her friend that clearly needs help but won't accept it. And I think that stigma around, I don't want somebody to step into my business. You know, why do these people want to know about my life? I don't, maybe I'm avoiding therapy, right? And so it sort of leads itself into this idea about therapy being bad or seeking help as being bad.
Right.
Yeah.
That there's great stigma around it.
Absolutely.
Another thing that really stands out to me is the inflammatory language that the kids are using. And they mean very well. They're actually pointing out to us, this is stigma. It's crazy people. It's
one of
being
those
wrong in the
people.
head.
Exactly.
It's that kind of, but that is important to me because language is powerful.
It is.
So even the fact that these are the constructs that they're using, these are the definitions that they're using, the inflammatory language is an important aspect, I think, in this particular segment.
It's that cultural concept we've got that even if they're not aware of it, that's the underlying message that they have about accepting help. So even if they might be able to move beyond that, our base layer still has this really negative idea about therapy and about accepting help, which is just, that's a horrible piece of stigma that still exists.
That still exists.
Oh, we
Right.
have to be able
So
to
there's
get
a
through
lot
that.
to deconstruct.
Right.
If this is the scaffolding that they're building their ideas upon,
Yes.
there's a lot to deconstruct
Yeah.
out of teen years,
Yes.
honestly,
Right.
which stands out. This next section, which is, it's interesting. So each group kind of throws something at us that we
Yes.
weren't thinking about. And that's next
why we did
section
it.
for the teens is that teens go to teens. Like that's their first line of defense really is probably to get to their peers, which is something that we know as
Absolutely.
clinicians, but just some beautiful ideas came out of this. So we created a segment of this video on that.
And so here they are with teens going to teens.
Personally, I experienced that with a friend too. Like, she was struggling with stuff. And I was like, hey, I know your parents aren't like the most understanding about things like that, but like, we can reach out and we can like find a way to like help get you in therapy, or like talk to a teacher or talk to an adult. And she kind of just pushed it under the rug. But for me personally, when I like interact with my friends, I try to be like as understanding as possible and like listen to them and help them with like what they need. And I'm also like brutally honest
Okay.
with them.
Yeah.
And I'm not gonna lie to them and tell them that like everything that they're doing is okay if it's not okay, and that they actually need help and that there is help for them.
I think I usually see if there's anything the person needs from me first off.
Yeah.
And I think just to keep talking to them, as long as they're still responding to me, I know that they're alive. I know that they are still, here.
Yeah.
And kind of what Aaron was saying, and just remind them that they are loved, they are wanted, that people love them, and hoping if it does get to a very serious point, I will tell my parents, I will do what I need to do to make sure that they are safe in every way possible.
Signs for me that someone's not actually experiencing something is when they're posting about it on social media. Like that girl who turned out to be faking everything, she would always post on her Instagram and her Snapchat that she was so depressed or anxious. And the young man I was friends with my freshman year, he does obviously have some mental issues, but he would always post about how he was going to kill himself, but he's still here.
Yeah.
So that's one of the signs for me that maybe they are struggling, but not as much as they say they are, because in my experience, if you're really struggling with something, you're not going to be posting it on Snapchat and Instagram for whoever many people to see.
Sure.
Whenever I've had a couple of friends express to me that they were having suicidal thoughts, like about a year ago now, maybe a friend's boyfriend actually messaged me and told me that she was thinking about suicide, and I immediately just texted her and I was like, you better not do that, because there are so many people who love you and like want to hang out with you and want you here. And then she wasn't mad at me, she was mad at her boyfriend for telling me. And I was like, what did you think he was going to do?
Right.
When you told him that he was going to reach out to everyone who he could, who knows that love you, to tell you how much they
you mean. Yeah, exactly. So was it worth it? Was it? Do you think it was worth it to him to reach out? And even though she got mad at him, do you think it was worth that?
He's still here, so yeah.
So good. That's amazing.
And so I tell them like how much I love them, how much I want them here, and it's also like, to me, suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Yes,
like I know firsthand that things do in fact get better. Like I've gotten myself out of some pretty dark times on my own, and I did go to therapy a few times, but mostly it was on my own. So I know firsthand that things, like, it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem.
Absolutely.
So this is an interesting subject.
It is.
Really, what you're seeing here is they were speaking to the fact that kids are going to go to kids first. We know that.
Absolutely.
We know peers are going to go to peers.
Right.
It creates a whole other set of barriers and disconnects, which is
Yes.
why we created this segment kind of separately so we could speak to that.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the barriers is, are kids really the best judge of what help their friends need?
Absolutely.
Right?
And
are you choosing the best friends to tell about those problems?
Yeah.
I mean, these are just real real issues in
Yes.
this. I mean, just because he's your friend doesn't mean he's the one that you should tell about this.
Right. Who's able to, again, so what happens is this cascade of decision-making tree effect, right? Who am I telling, and are they in a great place? If they're in a great place or not, and then who would they know to go to for resources? So what you're planning on as a teen when you start sharing this is that the next person you tell is going to have the answers or the ability to like navigate you in a direction that's going to actually net you the best support and treatment, which might not be the case at all.
It probably isn't.
It probably isn't. So there's this danger in that if we don't lay that scaffolding for kids to know where to go, there's a lot of danger in them being left to make those decisions completely 100% on their own. And then I like where Gabby says, well, I would try with my friend and then I would go to my parents. If I was like, oh, this doesn't seem to be working and I'm not sure if you're okay, but then I'm going to go to my parents. So she has a reference. Right. She has a step kind of, okay, I'm going to start with my friend, and then if I feel stuck, I'm going to go to my parents. Beautiful, because that's what we want, is there sort of be this structured idea about like, how can I start trying to help my peers, my friends, and then what do I do if I can't reach that, culmination of an answer that feels safe to me.
And if you go back to, they're telling us pretty honestly, kids don't want to reach out when they have problems, for sure, but kids don't want to reach out because of stigma and pressure and all of those things.
Absolutely.
When you think about that, one of the connections we could be making is when you're feeling completely healthy and you're the kid that somebody comes up to tell that they have an issue, you can go and get the help. That you, as the intermediary, being the one that somebody might come to, then go find that counselor that's like
a teacher,
coach. That's somebody that's gonna help in some way, an adult in their life, a safe adult in their life of some kind.
Exactly. And then I know Erin talks too about how she experienced social media, and I thought that was a really interesting, social media is, we joke about how it's like a whole thing on its own, because that's such a huge factor for teens today. But she says, I've watched these people suffer, and they might really be suffering, but it feels like they're putting it all out there. And then it lends itself to this, like, then maybe it's not super real because you're saying this, but then you're still there next week in school. So I think there's this unreality around social media. And then again, what I think happens is when kids are faced with something like that online, they have to decide, is this real or not?
Yeah.
Is it, do I intervene or not? So there's this thing again where there's another decision-making tree, if you will. And I'm like, again, if we go back time and time again, the message that we send is anytime someone puts a message out there, we want to take it seriously because we don't want to guess if someone's actually safe or not. And so that's that dichotomy, like, where how do they live in that world where they're seeing those things, that it looks like the person ends up okay. But that probably isn't always the case either. So there's this a guessing game we're playing about, like, hey, safety or not safety, that feels really scary to me to rely on that being a decision-making method for our kids. That's what they're faced with on a regular basis. Their Snapchats and their TikToks and their whatever they're doing, Instagram, they're seeing things that might be really scary, and then they're left to decide what to do with it and where do they go. Just a scary place to be.
It is, for sure.
Yeah.
Now, this sequence ends with one of the myths that I think is most prolific around suicide. And so I want to really address and dispel it right now. So this idea that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem needs to be eradicated from our language. It is an effective solution to having major distress and turmoil internally. I will say it again, it is an effective solution to having an internal experience that is overwhelming and brings you to the end of what you have for resource.
Exactly. And I think that's how I feel about it too, is, that it's, the word temporary is where I get kind of, hung up too, is that it's, when we say it's an effective solution, I know people just, watching our video are going to have a visceral response. What do you mean it's an effective solution? We're not saying it's a positive solution.
No.
We're saying it's an effective way to end your pain.
That's right.
We don't want that to be the solution. But I think to even say it's a permanent solution, absolutely, that's a fact, to a temporary problem, we are making an assumption that somebody woke up and had a bad day and then committed suicide. sometimes suicides culminate after someone has been going through depression, anxiety, significant issues for years. So it doesn't feel like a temporary problem.
Right.
So the language for us is just really, we still hear it, and it's honestly, it's antiquated. It's an antiquated statement.
It's dangerous. If I'm being really frank, it's a dangerous myth. And you'll hear it throughout our video series because it permeates our society. And this is why I'm being really strong in my language. This needs to get eradicated.
Yeah.
It has to be because it interferes with our ability to actually help people, connect with people, and get them the resources at the time that they need it.
And it's a weird way. In a weird way, it invalidates their feelings once again.
For sure.
When I say that, what I mean is it's a permanent solution to a temporary problem. When you say that to someone, and I've said it, by the way, guilty.
Oh, for sure.
I've said this. I have said this to clients, so I got to own it because I have said it. And in our work was where I finally came away going, what have I been saying? Because it actually feels so invalidating. Your temporary little thing you got going on here, you're making a long-term, decision about something that's going to pass. We know, we have the wisdom that things will change and pass. When someone is in deep, significant depression and pain, that is not how they feel. They do not feel it's temporary. They do not feel, they're not thinking that way. They're thinking, this could be my current state of feeling forever. And I would rather be done than have to sit in this pain forever.
That's right.
And I know that sounds so logical, but I think we've lost it in this messaging that we use. Yes. And so I'm really like, my passion is we've got another statement we'll share down the way, so you have to show up for the toolbox, but we've got other phrases we like better. That we want to get out there and start utilizing to stop kind of hanging on to this antiquated material that's really, it's ineffective, and it's, in fact, like you said, can be terribly damaging. So we really, when you say language has so much, I have been teaching that in my office for years, right? We say it so much to people about, the language, the wording that you use is so important to people. It is. It's so, that message, and to us. Yeah. So we really have to be mindful of that. And this was such a money thing for her to say that and share that for us, because we were like, we were going to go there. So thank you, Erin. Exactly. But we were going to go there.
Just her either.
No,
it's just
so many people.
It just comes up and up and up and up.
It does.
There's many, we could go on for hours,
Absolutely.
I swear to God. Why this is a really dangerous thing to believe and to say, and it's invalidating, and it creates a situation in which people aren't going to come and get help. If they think you're just going to think of their experience as a temporary problem, why would they want to come to somebody for help? They've already defeated themselves because of society's idea that this is a temporary issue and life is going to get better. Maybe life will get better, and you can't get them there without connecting to them.
Exactly.
And telling them they have a temporary problem disconnects you.
Absolutely.
Just on the surface
It's
of
just
it.
huge.
So we just wanted to pull that particular myth out and really kind of dissect it a little bit more.
Oh, yeah.
Coming up next, we're going to listen to our teens' ideas on some recommendations for how we could be doing things better.
One thing I would just like to bring up is social media, because it's been known for a long time that social media can impact mental health, and it actually did affect mine. I don't use Instagram anymore at all because there was just a huge point of negativity for me, and I stopped using it in late February maybe, and I haven't been on it since, and I feel so much better. It's unreal.
Yeah.
So social media is a huge part of teen mental health. We have our homeroom class together, and I walked in and I sit next to her, and she's sitting there with her head down on the table and her eyes closed. Like, I thought she was sleeping, actually.
Right.
So I just left her alone. Like, I didn't want, I thought she's either sleeping or she does not want to talk. So I let her be. Yeah. And then, so I'm sitting there doing my own thing, and she suddenly sits up and looks at me and goes, "Are you mad at me?" And I said, "No, why would I be mad at you?" And then she just shrugged and looked away from me. So I'm like, you were giving off the body language that you did not want to talk, so I let you be. So you can't be mad when I don't engage with you.
And I wonder if, too, sometimes that is a barrier or disconnect, is like the magical thinking that somebody's going to know I'm sad.
Yeah.
Right.
Just how it transmits, one person to the next, and that's why schools don't admit it. They say an unfortunate passing instead of suicide. Right. And suicide encourages more suicide.
So here we hear from Erin and Reese, and I like that she opens with social media, and I know that some of what her concerns are is how very stressful and damaging it can be, which is a fact. So a fact. And my recommendation would be, since that's where all the teens are, I think where she's going, also another way to look at this is, could we flip using social media and harness that in a beautiful way to actually reach out to teens, spread information, increase awareness, provide coping, ideas, things like that. I think there's a way to actually utilize where they are in a much more productive way. So I love that idea and that concept.
Yeah. And Reese pulls out this idea, he calls it an unfortunate death, is what the high school said. And we were talking about this. We think they actually have
an
unexpected death.
Right.
Regardless, high schools aren't able to say what's happening. Lots
without
of
permission.
Reasons for that.
Right.
So that we don't need to go into here.
Yes.
But I think that it shows this myth that he goes into, which is suicide creates more suicide. Now, we're going to talk more about that later in the series, so I won't spend a ton of time here. But again, I think that we could spin this differently and create a recommendation out of what could high schools do to connect with their kids instead of to shut things down. Saying unfortunate or unexpected death is really a shut-off valve.
It's a disconnect.
A disconnect,
Absolutely.
right? And here is a place that's very subtle, very small, that we could create a different connection. And maybe not even, recommend that they say it's suicide necessarily, but how do we create a different connection at this point with kids so that they have a better understanding of what is actually happening.
Absolutely. And I think I would address the idea that the energy that he talks about briefly is the story starts here and this person suffering shares this person's suffering, and then it increases suffering. And I think that that's absolutely true. I do think as they talk, what I don't think we're getting in there that I think gets lost in the shuffle is we assume that suicide creates suicide. What I would say is communication can prevent teen suicide.
Right.
It's the not talking about it. It's the not addressing it that I believe is actually creating more teen suicide. So I think that's the shuffle there a little bit, is that it's the way that we see that. And I'm grateful that he would lob that out there for us to kind of address here, because I think that that's such a huge piece of this, is how do we sit with that idea and maybe look at it in a different light, rather than just always saying that suicide is going to lead to more suicide and talking about it, right? That keeps that same idea, that same stigma attached to it.
Yeah.
It's a myth. All right, next up, we've got a few other thoughts on recommendations.
I have very supportive parents, so I always know that I can talk to them.
Yes.
I know that's not always the case for every single person, but I'm fortunate enough to have parents like that. And sometimes it's just a matter of talking to them and, releasing my steam and just letting it all go. Maybe it's crying, maybe it's screaming, maybe it's yelling, whatever it is, I have that outlet, and I'm very fortunate enough to have that. I think another thing is to not put so much pressure on students and not say you need to be doing this. If you're feeling like this in any way, this is what you need to do. I feel like to create a more personal connection, sort of. I'm not sure how that would work, but not putting as much pressure on it. That's also another thing, how it was more in a smaller group, because I know the school has done big, assemblies, but it's kind of harder to reach out to people. So having it on a smaller scale and talking one-to-one or in a smaller group.
I was thinking about times where we've learned about coping and during swim season.
Yeah.
Because I've been on the team for 5 years, and I feel like every year we have each week is focused on a certain topic to help benefit us throughout the season. And one of them is learning healthy habits to be able to manage stress. And Jen will come in and talk and do stuff with yoga, and then with our captains and our coach, we brainstorm a list of things that we can do to help cry, journal, take a bath, do things yoga, swim, just things like that. So that's probably one of the times that I've learned about coping mechanisms. having more people, like, less stigma around it and more knowledge and like learning about it and information just out there and like avenues that like you can get help from.
I thought of this when, I don't remember who brought it up first, but we were bringing up how everyone experiences it differently.
Yeah.
I thought of like if a friend like makes an appointment for or like goes to the counselors, when they call the person in instead of just saying like, oh, one of your friends like mentioned you were struggling, maybe say like one of your friends is concerned about you, that you're struggling with something, and just like automatically say like what would be helpful for you, like what can we do that would help you. So it's a lot more personal and
Yeah.
maybe more likely to actually get a legitimate response of what the person needs. She'll text me occasionally and she'll just be like, I've been really depressed but nobody noticed. And like, if you don't tell anybody, how are they supposed to know?
In the recommendations, I absolutely love that Gabby leads us out of the gate with talking about using your parents as a support. So I think that's just huge for teens to realize that they can utilize their parents. And her parents are actually in the parent panel. And so it's really cool to see that the connection that they've created, that she would feel connected enough, sorry for the pun, to go to them and utilize them as a resource for support, which I just think is beautiful. And then she riffs about this idea of, you know, there's a tendency in schools to kind of want to do a one-hit wonder, a guest speaker, you know, like the big, you know, kind of meetings, venues where they have all the kids come together, and then they're talking about this as a subject. And rather, she's saying that deeper connections might be found actually in a small group setting, and being more mindful of the personal connection around it versus it just being this kind of like one-hit wonder and everybody's going to hear the same message again. That same theme of like individualized approach just being so super crucial to that. And then Nicole steps in and she talks about where she did learn some things. Actually was her coach would send out emails talking about stress management and how to do some things, how to deal with some things, and then also learning about some mindfulness and yoga techniques in her swim team experience. So I think that's really neat that like utilizing those community resources though, that there's these really beautiful people that are already in place, that if those people can step in and utilize that their wisdom and conveying those ideas and sharing concepts around mental health and support and self-care, that's an awesome way to distribute that information to teens.
And it's then her, you know, recommendation is less stigma, more education, right? But it feeds in.
Exactly.
If we're creating those opportunities in other ways, not formal big assemblies, but necessarily, or health class necessarily, but opportunities like spending some time in coaching, talking about emotional wellness, talking about balance in your life. That really is the money as far as opportunity. And Erin points that out as well.
Follows right up with it. It's beautiful.
She says, look, you know, we need to have more of an individualized approach because each person's distress and mental health is an individualized experience. Now, when you're trying to put together curriculum and policy, that's a nightmare because you can't create that in policy and in curriculum. You can create that in small spaces where all the adults in these teens' lives try and create connection. You won't have connection with every kid, but if every kid has a connection, that becomes a really big opportunity. Right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's so beautiful too that we talked about in the very beginning of the series, the idea of always meeting our clients where they are. So in this case, because we're talking about teens, meeting them where they are means looking at them in an office and saying to them, and I love this idea, what do you need? And just listening, right? It's just prompting that idea of like, what do you need? Where are you? And I know that Keith pulls in this beautiful idea that he says it's called stop, drop, and listen. And it's this beautiful concept that he utilized in his office, which is what made him so damn successful, was that he would stop, drop, and listen exactly to a kid sitting in front of him. Where are they? What are the struggles? How can I help? But listening first. And I think that that's really what they're getting at is, can we slow the roll? Can we step in and just listen? Can we listen with empathy and compassion, and then show up and creating that, because that's creating connection. And then can we decide what we need to do from there? But laying that groundwork every time.
Creating the connection, which creates opportunity even for kids to start to open up. Which is, you know, another big point. Yes, teens need to own some of this, in that, like, we can't know that you need help unless you tell us you need help. And I think it's our responsibility to create that culture in which that can happen easily. And quite nicely, this whole group went through a bunch of barriers, stigma, and disconnections that interfere with that.
Absolutely.
So clearly we need to address those to create the space for these connections.
Absolutely. So next up, we're going to let our teens leave a message for other teens that might be struggling with suicide.
Suicide is never the answer. I know it hurts. I know it's hard. But it will get better. Life always has a way of working itself out. It's not always fair, but it goes, and it gets better. There are people you can always talk to, people who care about you and love you, and it's truly terrible losing someone you care about, and then knowing that if you would talk to them, or they'd talk to you, would have probably fixed it. It's awful. No one wants you gone. Everyone wants you to stay.
I want you to know that it is okay to not be okay. Everyone is going through different things in their lives and handling them differently, but however you are feeling is completely 100% valid. And believe it or not, there are so many people that are feeling the exact same way, even though they might not be in the exact same situation. Know that there are people that you can talk to and outlets and resources that you can use to help you feel better about situations. Also, know that there are so many people that love and care about you so much. There are so many people that are so proud of where you are now and what got you to this point. I know I am. I'm so proud of you. And know that you are so much stronger than you think that you are. And keep going through life, because I know it's tough. Life is tough and you just got to keep going. I believe in you, and so do so many other people. Just keep going and never give up.
Things may seem like they're falling apart right now, but they're falling apart to fall into place for the things that are in store for you.
So thank you for joining us in this video. And thanks to the teens that let us interview them and shared some of their wisdom with us, and also highlighted some of the areas that we're gonna, throughout this set of videos in the series, really address.
Yeah.
And then end the series with a toolbox that Jen and I have come up with for our community.
It was an amazing
The
experience.
next video in our series is going to be with some adults that struggled with suicide in particular throughout their teen years. And so it's a real unique perspective and a nice addition to this series.
Yeah, we hope you'll plug in for that one, where we again take away different information, and I think again some more wisdom based on their adult experience looking back. And so we definitely walked away with a really in-depth perspective of the suffering that goes on. And so plug in for that one next.